And we're back on the Morgan Streetman Show. Morgan, I've got some of those swine flu numbers for you. If you don't have them up on your screen over there, we're looking at 12,469 deaths in the United States. And that swine flu infected nearly 61 million people in the U.S.
Interesting. So, compare those numbers. How many have we got on COVID-19 so far? What is it about?
30-some thousand. We might be up to 35,000 cases in the United States. And I'll have to double check on those.
35,000 compared to about 60 million?
And 458 deaths so far in the United States.
Compared to over 10,000?
Yes, 12,400.
Wow. So, the swine flu in 2009, at least to date, was a much bigger deal, right? And you heard the World Health Organization didn't even want to declare that a pandemic. And I don't remember the media going after President Barack Obama at the time and saying he wasn't doing enough or he wasn't managing this crisis. So I just think that's useful as kind of a comparison in terms of what's going on with the media.
And I think just the way information was disseminated even 10 years ago, we're talking about people spending less time on their phones and getting it instantaneously and more time waiting until they watch the news at night or waiting until, so I think it was the way it was delivered and the frequency at which.
Sure. Yeah, they've worked everybody up into a frenzy. And, of course, the concern, I think, with the way they're responding to it this time around, and look, maybe, one of the things I think we've been focusing on this show is saying, we just don't know that much about this virus even yet. So we just don't know what's going to come of all this. But the way they're focusing on dealing with it was shutting down the entire country. And then you see the news stories rolling in, talking about maybe up to 30% unemployment in our near future. This sounds pretty dire. I think this could be a lot worse. Let's just put it this way, and again, not trying to minimize anything out of this Wuhan virus, but the number of cases and the number of deaths is significantly less than the regular seasonal flu. And, of course, you look at the media, and you've got all these stories about what it's like to get this particular Wuhan virus. And what I'm noticing, now they're anecdotal stories, but they make it sound pretty horrible. They're really not focusing on the fact that they also have stories out there that say something like 86% of people who get this don't even have any symptoms at all. So you're talking about really the smallest number, something less than 5% are going to get a really severe reaction, a really severe sickness from this particular virus. And that's very similar to the seasonal flu. There is a certain percentage of people who get the seasonal flu who get extremely sick, and obviously a certain percentage who even die from it. And what are they dying from? They're dying from pneumonia, right? They're drowning in the secretions from their own lungs. But you ought to read some of these news articles describing the Wuhan virus and what people have to go through. And they say, this is much worse than the flu. Well, it's much worse than most of our experiences with the flu, because most of us who ever had the flu, even if we've had a bad case of the flu, it's knocked us on our tail for about 5 or 6 days, right? That's what the flu is. It's a real bad cold, at least in our minds. And what they're saying here is people get really bad pneumonia from coronavirus. Well, guess what? People get really bad pneumonia from the flu, too. So you can also get just as sick from the seasonal flu.
What I also found to be sort of something to look at is how people are describing their symptoms. And because they're going so in depth, you have a doctor who had it and he was describing everything he was going through. And for someone to actually write down how many times they coughed something up and the nature of it, it sounds pretty graphic and scary and gross. But when you're actually sick and you're going through a terrible cold or flu, it is what it is. And again, I'm not minimizing it at all, but it's just the nature of specifying your symptoms is alarming to people.
Yeah, right. Well, and, you read these things and they're describing it in such detail. And even I'm thinking, I'm going to get that version of it. My luck, that'll be what I get, right? And that's what we're all thinking. And maybe that's the point of flooding our news feeds with these stories, is to get you thinking you're going to get the worst of the worst of the worst out of this. and you know what? Your life is over, and therefore you better hide in your house and just hope and pray that you don't get this terrible, terrible thing. When the reality on the ground is that so far, not a lot of people have got it. Of those who've gotten it, not a lot of people have gotten the more severe version of it. I mean, I've talked to a lot of people who think they may have already even had this thing. I mean, we all know people, I would imagine, and maybe not, but we all know people who've gotten sick this year already with something that they thought was not quite the flu. It was something worse than the flu. And so, I've talked to several people myself who have told me, I think I had this thing back in January because I got so sick and I didn't really know what it was, but I came out of it. Again, an experience like those years when you do happen to get the flu and you get a bad case of it, one that you really notice as opposed to just thinking you've got some kind of seasonal cold during winter. But one of those years where you're like, wow, this is more than a cold. I've had the flu. You know it.
One of two things can happen. That we'll either learn to wash our hands more, stay distance, and when someone has the flu or something, stay home. Or when this corona's gone and the flu comes back, people will go, it's just a flu. Don't worry about it. And everybody will be hugging and kissing and, it's not coronavirus.
Thank you for listening to the Morgan Streetman Show. We hope you enjoyed what you heard. And if you did, please click like and subscribe to help us out. And remember that we recommend that you exercise your brain at least once a week.